Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and today Apple released iOS 16.0.3 to the public. So if you have an iPhone 8 all the way up to the 14 Pro and Pro Max, you should have an update for it. You can check it in your software update settings. Now this came in at 1.21 gigabytes, that's on my iPhone 14 Pro Max, and was about that size on all the devices you'll see in this video. Now, along with this, Apple only released one update, watchOS 9.0.2. So that will be available if you have an Apple Watch, and also if you're on the beta, the public beta, iOS 16.1 beta 4, you won't have an update because you're on a newer version. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what's new. The build number is 20A392. That's how you know you're on the latest version. And this particular version does have a modem update. So if you're updating from iOS 16.0.2 or older, you'll have a modem update, which will hopefully help connectivity, whether that be 4G, 5G, or something else. Now the first thing is, most of these updates are specific to the iPhone 14 models, since Apple actually had such a buggy launch with the latest iPhones. That's not true of every update in iOS 16.0.3, but most of them. And the first thing they've fixed has to do with incoming call and app notifications, where they could be delayed or just not delivered at all on iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max models specifically. It didn't affect the other iPhone 14 models, so it had to do with whatever's different with the A16 Bionic. Also, this resolves that issue with Apple CarPlay. So if you're plugging in with Apple CarPlay and people couldn't hear you, you had a low microphone volume, that should be fixed in this update. Apple calls it out specifically. Also, if you were launching the camera on the new iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro Max, sometimes it was slow to launch or slow to switch between cameras. Apple has fixed this, and it's much smoother as well. So as you can see, I'm zooming in with the 14 Pro Max. If we go to ultra wide, then zoom in a little bit more, it seems to be much smoother this time around. So that's something they've fixed with this update. Also, they've fixed an issue on all iPhones where mail could crash on launch after receiving a malformed email. So if someone put some odd characters in the mail, now it wouldn't open. That issue has been resolved. We've seen this in the past with odd characters that cause the overall OS in general just to sort of not work properly as far as Unicode problems. So this resolves that issue on all iPhone devices. Now, as far as additional fixes and changes, well, Apple hasn't mentioned anything specifically, and that's a bit disappointing if you're on an iPhone 14 Pro or 14 Pro Max and you were having the sort of low brightness level flickering issue. When your phone was at a low or medium brightness in the dark areas of the display, many people reported it was flickering. So they haven't mentioned whether or not they've fixed that. Also, many people were having issues where Wi-Fi in general just wouldn't work. So Wi-Fi would sort of just disconnect, not work properly. And also swiping home, we don't know if they've fixed that. When you'd swipe home, it could be very buggy or stuttery or slow. That still pertains to the betas that we're on currently with iOS 16.1, but it was happening for many people on iOS 16.0.2 on the latest phones. So Apple hasn't said anything about that. Also, storage doesn't seem to be too much of an issue in this update, but if we go into general, then we go to iPhone storage, give it just a moment to load here. You'll see this is using 24 gigabytes of 512, so not too many, but you'll see iOS is taking up 9.5 gigabytes and the updates overwrite the old one. So it may take a moment for this to clear out. We'll give it a minute to load and then take a look. And you'll see it loaded as I was speaking. We have 3.62 gigabytes in use. This, of course, can vary greatly, but most people say that it's better as far as that goes. However, that may not be the case for everyone. It will use some storage as available depending on the apps and the different cache you have as well. Now, I've had people report to me that this does not update the 5G connectivity issues that people were having in India. India is rolling out 5G in many different locations, and it's just unavailable for many people. If you're in settings and you go to cellular, the option's just not there in order to activate 5G for some people. So that's something Apple still has yet to update. Maybe it will come with another update with 16.1, or they can just push it over the air. Either way, they had to get the different bands and things that India is going to use for their carriers. So I know Airtel in general isn't seeing that update yet. Now, of course, with this update, like many updates, there's actually a security update. We'll go into the Apple Security Update website. I'll link it in the description, and you can see here iOS 16.0.3 and watchOS as well. If we go into 16.0.3, you'll see as we scroll down, there's only one thing noted, and it has to do with mail. So that's probably the bug fix as well, but it's also a security issue. So it says available for iPhone 8 and later, and the impact was it was processing a maliciously crafted email message may lead to a denial of service. The description is, or the fix, an input validation issue was addressed with improved input validation. So that resolves that issue. And of course, that leads me to, should you install iOS 16.0.3? And just for that security update alone, absolutely I would install it since you're already on iOS 16. If you're still debating that and you're on iOS 15.7, of course you can wait, but either way, I would install it if you're on iOS 16 updates, as it's important due to the security update. If you're on an iPhone 14, of course, I would absolutely install it to fix the issues with the latest phones. Of course, we're waiting for iOS 16.1's release. That has the major changes and updates, and iOS 16.1 Beta 5 or iOS 16.1 RC or release candidate could be as soon as tomorrow or Wednesday. Tomorrow we'll know whether or not, or Wednesday we'll know whether or not we actually have the final version coming out very soon, or something different. So if we see the release candidate tomorrow, we could see the final release as early as next week. If we see that, then we'll move on to iOS 16.2 and later updates. However, I would expect iOS 16.1 to be within a week or two away. We're also waiting for iPadOS 16's initial release to the public. They may call it iOS 16.1, and also, of course, macOS Ventura or macOS 13 Ventura. So we could see those within the next week or two based on what Apple's doing with these updates. Hopefully we see them sooner rather than later, as there's some great features with macOS Ventura and iPadOS. So hopefully we'll see those very, very soon. Now, as far as overall performance, well, this hasn't been out long enough to really know what it's like after a few days of use, but so far it seems nice and fast. This is an 11 Pro Max, and if we go over to we'll go into music, we'll let it load on the 11 Pro Max. It's pulling from Wi-Fi. It's the first time I've opened it. I already opened it on the 14 Pro Max. So you'll see there, we opened it. It's still nice and smooth, and ProMotion seems to be nice and smooth as well. I've had others report in my Discord server and Telegram server that they actually are seeing improved performance. Things seem to be a little bit quicker, but that's just the initial use, so it could change over days. As far as the overall heat, the back of the phone does feel nice and cool. It was a little bit warm after installing an update, which is completely normal, but it doesn't seem like it's overly hot. So typically that means it's going to perform well. Apple's managing thermals without a problem. As far as overall battery life, I've been using iOS 16.1 betas, beta 4, and yesterday I had 3 hours and 45 minutes of screen on time, 2 hours and 18 minutes of screen off time, with about 45% of my battery being used. Typically, that's pretty good so far, but iOS 14 battery hasn't been great with the always-on display, and we don't know if Apple's fixed this. So it will take a few days to measure that and know for sure, and I'll have a follow-up on the weekend where we'll cover that in more detail. As far as initial benchmarks, I did run those on the 14 Pro Max. I compared iOS 16.0.3 to 16.1 Beta 4, and you'll see on the latest update, 16.0.3 here is showing 1,887 for single core, 5,345 for multi-core. That's right after installing the update. If we compare that to what we have on the latest beta, it's very similar in speed. So very similar within 5 or so on both of them, maybe 20 on multi-core. So in general, quite good. I really wouldn't worry about it. Typically, if you're within maybe a couple hundred, it's not a problem. So that's just the initial marks. It'll probably improve as things complete in the background. If you're getting poor battery life over the next few days, it could be computing in the background, indexing things, and finalizing everything inside, whether or not it needs to recheck your photos, run those through the neural engine or not. So give it a day or two to really test how battery life is. So that's everything with iOS 16.0.3. Of course, we're looking forward to major features and changes, which we can expect some new ones with iOS 16.1. If you found anything new, though, in iOS 16.0.3 that I didn't mention in the video, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Of course, if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.